them transition back into civilian life as seamlessly as possible. I will vote yes on this bill, and I now reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves.
Anybody want to talk?
The woman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, and I would yield to the gentleman from Nevada, the author of this bill, Mr. Heck, for such time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 6361, the Vulnerable Veterans Housing Reform Act of 2012. As stated, this bill would remove an unnecessary barrier that prevents our disabled wartime veterans from receiving the housing assistance they so critically need. It does this by preventing the Department of Housing and Urban Development from considering our veterans' aid and attendance benefits as income when calculating their eligibility for housing assistance. The aid and attendance benefit is an enhanced pension program provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs to our nation's wartime veterans who are severely disabled and have little or no income. According to the VA, veterans eligible for the aid and attendance benefit are defined as those requiring the aid of another person in order to perform his or her activities of daily living, such as bathing, feeding, dressing, using the restroom, adjusting prosthetic devices, or protecting themselves from the hazards of their daily environment. In order to receive this benefit, our severely disabled veterans must first establish their eligibility for a low-income pension. Once eligibility is determined, those low-income disabled vets can receive an additional aid and attendance benefit annually to help defray the cost of their medical care. Now, this is an important point. The aid and attendance benefit is for medical care. It is not discretionary income. As you can imagine, these veterans struggle daily to keep the lights on, put food on the table, and to keep a roof over their heads. Add to that the exorbitant costs of paying for a live-in aid, and it becomes increasingly difficult for them to stay in their homes. The Department of Housing and Urban Development operates a number of programs that can assist these veterans. However, the current statute requires that the aid and attendance benefit be counted as income when determining eligibility for housing assistance. Mr. Speaker, this makes no sense. The VA provides this benefit to ensure that our low-income disabled wartime veterans have the necessary resources to receive the medical care they need and have earned. The cost of an assisted living facility can be $39,600, and the median cost of a room in a nursing home is between $73,000 and $81,000 annually. By providing the aid and attendance benefit and keeping the veteran in their home, we are doing them a service and saving taxpayer money. Continuing to count the aid and attendance benefit as income does nothing more than reduce the housing assistance available to our low-income disabled vets. Mr. Speaker, it's the stated goal of both this House and this administration to reduce homelessness in our veteran population. Passing this legislation will help ensure that we achieve this goal. H.R. 6361 also includes an important provision authored by my distinguished colleague from the 9th District of Texas, Congressman Al Green. His provision would create a pilot program to provide grants to qualified nonprofit organizations for the purpose of modifying and rehabilitating homes for our nation's low-income disabled veterans. H.R. 6361 was drafted in a bipartisan manner, and this is reflected in the overwhelming support it received when it was reported unanimously by the House Financial Services Committee on September 12, 2012. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 6361 will go a long way in providing the services and assistance our low-income disabled vets have earned and deserved. I thank the subcommittee chair, the distinguished lady from Illinois, all the members of the committee for their support of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support this critical bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I would like to compliment the gentleman on his statement and point out that across the country, one of the largest groups of people that are homeless are veterans. And this particular bill has the right incentives to direct housing assistance to our veterans and help to keep them in their homes. I have no other speakers at this time, so I yield back to the gentle chair lady, Ms. Biggert.
The gentlelady yields back.
I have no further speakers either, and so I would yield back the balance of the time.
I yield back the balance of the time.
The gentlelady yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6361 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 6431.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6431, a bill to provide flexibility with respect to United States support for assistance provided by international financial institutions for Burma and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, and the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record on this measure.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. This afternoon, Congress was finally able to present Aung San Suu Kyi the Congressional Gold Medal. Congress's highest honor was awarded for her courageous and unwavering commitment to peace, to nonviolence, to human rights, and of course to democracy in Burma. I was an original co-sponsor of Mr. Crowley's legislation that set the stage for today's ceremony. Of course, that legislation passed years ago, back in 2008, when Aung San Suu Kyi's house was her prison. Many thought, of course, that this day today would never come. That she was able to visit Capitol Hill today to accept this award, meeting with members of Congress, is a testament of the changes taking place in her important country. The opposition has won seats in Parliament. Media restrictions have been eased. Hundreds of prisoners, including many this week, have been released. Congress can be proud of the role that it has played in getting Burma to this point. Sanctions were important, but sanctions can't keep up the momentum for democracy in Burma today. That was the message that Aung San Suu Kyi delivered in Washington. Instead, she emphasized the role that the U.S. can play in helping to build up the institutions that Burma badly needs. This country, once Southeast Asia's richest country, is now its poorest. Its corrupt and brutal generals have destroyed the economic landscape of Burma. The Burmese people are destitute. Democracy will not thrive in this economic despair. Isolated for decades, the institutions Burma needs to run an economy are either very weak or they do not exist. International financial institutions could help Burma establish the economic infrastructure needed to reconnect with the world. This assistance also can help the Burmese with their basic needs. Without this in place, the potential for political backsliding is real. However, several laws on our books direct the U.S. representative at each international financial institution to vote no when it comes to any proposal related to Burma. There is no waiver, which is very unusual when it comes to sanctions. I'd note that a U.S. no vote is not a veto. It doesn't stop these institutions from being involved with Burma. It just stops us from being part of the process. So we have to ask ourselves, when are the interests of the U.S. and the Burmese people best served? When the U.S. is playing a leading role, helping to shape these institutions' involvement with Burma? Or are they best served when the U.S. representative is shut out of the room, left with only one option? This legislation gives more options: yes, no, or abstain. When U.S. support is possible, that gives us leverage. We have great weight at these institutions, even while they are mainly funded by others. Like other members, I'm not happy with where Burma is today. I want all political prisoners released. There is too much ethnic violence. This bill doesn't touch the import ban or asset freezes, of course, and those are targeted at the regime. The Treasury Department should use its authority to target any individual that is undermining progress in Burma. This legislation is licensed to bolster reform, where appropriate and where possible, not a seal of approval. Given where Burma is today, it's appropriate that Congress respond in this way to ensure that the U.S. is in a position to continue to press for reforms. Moving forward, Congress will need to ensure that these financial institutions are pushing stringent transparency and monitoring its impact on human rights. Those goals, which we all share, are best advanced by adopting this legislation. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, currently congressional mandates require that the U.S. representative must vote no on any proposed assistance going from an international financial institution to Burma. This bill before us today would change that. It would allow the Secretary of the Treasury to instruct our executive directors at the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the IMF to support proposed assistance to Burma if the President determines that it is in our national interest. This flexibility will be needed in the coming months. There will likely be some important votes coming up at the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank on development projects and areas clearances packages for Burma. Binding the U.S. representative to always vote no on such measures would work directly against our hope of engaging Burma and supporting her democratic reforms, and that's why I strongly support this bill. The economic and political reforms in Burma show great promise. That is why the United States lifted the sanctions on investment in Burma back in July. And the right thing to do now is to support development and economic aid to Burma through the international financial institutions. Both multilateral development and humanitarian assistance are important now because Burma needs both long-term and short-term results. Her people need to see that a democracy has tangible, positive impacts on their everyday lives. It is not just in the best interest of the Burmese people that they continue to support the democratic and economic reforms in the country. It is in the interest of the United States as well, and I would say that it's in the world's best interest too. It was a great honor today to welcome Aung San Suu Kyi to the Capitol. She is a courageous woman of matchless strength and towering integrity. I congratulate her on receiving the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest award that we can give anyone, which she so richly deserves. She honors us by her presence and her acceptance of this award. Her unshakable conviction that democratic values and fundamental human rights were not only possible, but absolutely necessary for Burma, provided her country with a model of courage and perseverance that helped to sustain it throughout the most difficult years. We congratulate her, we thank her, and I want to let her know that she is a very special heroine to me, and that we remain strongly committed to the cause of reform in her country and to supporting not only her country but her people. Aung San Suu Kyi has said that aid and investment in Burma must be done in a way that is democracy-friendly. She describes that as investments that prioritize transparency, accountability, workers' rights, and environmental sustainability. Aung San Suu Kyi has also said that the Government needs to apply internationally recognized standards, such as the IMF Code of Good Practices on Fiscal Transparency. I agree with her wholeheartedly on both of these issues. As the international financial institutions move to re-engage in Burma, and we move through this piece of legislation in support of that engagement, I urge the administration to use its leadership at the IFES to ensure that assistance to Burma supports democratic reforms, ensures an open and transparent government, and establishes safeguards that support growth, alleviates poverty, and safeguards the rights of the people. There is a tide in the affairs of nations that, taken at the flood, can lead to greatness. And this is such a moment of political and economic import for Burma. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and to continue to support the efforts of the people of Burma towards the establishment of a truly just and democratic society. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
We have no further speakers. I will close,
Okay.
but I don't know if the gentlelady has additional speakers.
I have no additional speakers. I thought there would be some coming, but I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, very good. In that case, I thank the gentlelady. And Mr. Speaker, it's said that Burma is undergoing a triple transition from a military government to a more open and democratic government. Also, it's moving from conflict to peace, and it's moving from a closed economy to a more open economy. All three of these transitions, of course, are equally daunting. Aung San Suu Kyi's visit to the United States tells us just how far this country has come, but she also reminds us how far Burma has left to go. So our responsibility is to keep pushing Burma in the right direction. Pushing it in the right direction so that all political prisoners are freed, and so that a fully democratic government respects the rights of all of its people, including its ethnic minorities. This legislation is an appropriate response to ensure that Burma continues moving in the right direction, and I urge the adoption of the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6431? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Purposes of the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2827 with an amendment.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2827, a bill to amend the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 to clarify provisions relating to the regulation of municipal advisors and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, and the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to add extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 2827, which would clarify the definition of a municipal advisor to reflect the intent of the United States Congress. This bill received unanimous support and passed out of the Financial Services Committee with a vote of 60 to 0.
I'd like to urge my colleagues to support this important bipartisan legislation. Municipal advisors are consultants who advise local municipalities about bond issuances, bond proceed investment, financial derivative uses, and other financial matters. Like traditional financial advisors, municipal advisors must comply with an existing legal and regulatory framework while owing their clients a fiduciary duty. But before Dodd-Frank, certain municipal advisors were not subject to any regulations, state, federal, or otherwise. Obviously, this legal and unjustified discrepancy between regulated and unregulated municipal advisors created a significant and, I would argue, unfair competitive advantage in favor of the unregulated municipal advisors. Even more importantly, the regulated gap gave a few bad actors the opportunity to take advantage of the state and local government officials who, like most people, aren't familiar with advanced and technical financial products. Dodd-Frank Section 975 addressed this problem by requiring these unregulated advisors to register with the SEC and to follow rules written by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board. The provisions generally have bipartisan political support, as well as widespread industry support. However, most of us, both Republicans and Democrats, believe that the SEC's interpretation of the law has gone far beyond what Congress intended, among other things, requiring volunteer members of local governing boards, engineers providing technical and comparative analysis, and bank tellers, for instance, to register with the SEC as municipal advisors. In response to its proposal, the SEC received over 1,000 comment letters from across the industry that were overwhelmingly critical of the proposed rule. And that is why I introduced H.R. 2827. H.R. 2827 takes important steps to address these widely acknowledged concerns and specifies the scope and limits of Dodd-Frank's municipal advisor provisions. After introducing our original version, H.R. 2827, we asked everyone on both sides of the aisle and industry participants as well, with a wide variety of perspectives, to give us their comments and suggestions for improving the legislation. My colleague and co-sponsor from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, and I have spent countless hours working and listening with all concerned parties to ensure that we have fully considered all the viewpoints to come up with the best possible legislation that could also pass with broad bipartisan support. And I certainly want to thank her for all of her efforts at this time. Two concerns about the original version of this bill, Mr. Speaker, of H.R. 2827 that were most significant. First was that the original version of the bill would strike the federal fiduciary duty for municipal advisors, leaving in place just the state-based fiduciary duty standards. Second, the original bill would have excluded certain parties from regulation as municipal advisors, even when explicitly engaged to provide municipal advisor services. During the subcommittee markup, Ms. Moore and I articulated our plan for going forward with the legislation and invited more comment and suggestion from industry and other concerned parties. We were very pleased with the genuine engagement of the parties from across the industry and their willingness to generously share their time and experience, effort, and knowledge with us. All of these contributions ultimately produced a better and stronger amended bill. We believe that this new version of the bill addresses the points raised since the subcommittee markup, and while maintaining our broad coalition of bipartisan supporters. This new bill preserves the federal fiduciary standard and removes the blanket status exemptions while still maintaining a bright-line municipal advisor definition. It protects issuers by establishing clear lines for rules and for municipal advisory activity and provides clarity in the marketplace. And in addition to the amendment substance, I'm very proud of the process, what we've been able to undertake to get us to this point. I'd like to thank my colleague again, Ms. Moore, and the staff for working with me and my staff, and thank all those who worked with us to get us to where we are in this process. They were so generous in sharing their time, and I'm confident what we have is a good bill that we can move forward with. Again, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 2827. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Hey, Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 788, resolution providing for consideration of the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 118, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5, United States Code, of the rule submitted by the Office of Family Assistance of the Administration for Children and Families of the Department of Health and Human Services relating to waiver and expenditure authority under Section 1115 of the Social Security Act 42 United States Code 1315 with respect to the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 3409 to limit the authority of the Secretary of the Interior to issue regulations before December 31st, 2013 under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977 and providing for proceedings during the period from September 22nd, 2012 through November 12th, 2012.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. The gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, will control the time. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I think Mr. Dole has dealt very well with many of the specifics of H.R. 2827 relating to the regulation of municipal advisors. So before I lose people, I want to briefly talk about the process that brought the bill to this point and to thank a lot of people for their contributions to the final legislation. As you've heard, the bill that passed the Financial Services Committee by 60-0 reflects the legislative process at its absolute best. It was a collaborative effort between Republicans, Democrats, issuers and market participants, and very, very diligent staffers on both sides of the aisle. If there's a single element that is most responsible for the bill getting to this point, it is the integrity of the people involved. It speaks to their professionalism that they stayed at the table and negotiated with the singular purpose of getting to the best result for the municipal market. There were times when the issues were tough and the disagreements real, times where it would have been very easy for people to just give up and walk away. But to the credit of all involved, everyone kept talking and kept searching for solutions. Mr. Dole deserves a tremendous amount of credit for his leadership on this bill. He was consistently willing to engage tough issues in an open and thoughtful manner. I'd also like to thank all my colleagues on the committee, Republican and Democrat alike, for their valuable input as we negotiated the bill. Finally, I think it is important that I mention the important contributions of Mr. Frank and Ms. Waters. At many critical points, both were instrumental in providing guidance. H.R. 2827, which passed the House Financial Services Committee 60-0, was not, it almost didn't pass at all. There was so much confusion, I think, generated from the SEC promulgating a rule that initially was very, very confusing. But it's only the second legislative effort related to Dodd-Frank to pass the committee unanimously. Prior to the passage of Dodd-Frank, non-dealer advisors to municipal governments were unregulated. These unregulated parties were involved in a number of municipal market scandals that ultimately defrauded taxpayers. Section 975 brings municipal financial advisors, swap advisors, placement agents, and GIC brokers under federal securities law. It is a goal that is not partisan. Unfortunately, in 2010, the SEC released a proposed rulemaking related to Section 975 that created massive confusion in the municipal market regarding how Section 975 would be applied in the real world. H.R. 2827 seeks to clarify Section 975 to provide certainty to the market so that the rules can be implemented and taxpayers can benefit from the protection it brings. This bill takes a fundamentally different approach from the SEC of the definition of municipal advisors. It makes municipal advisor an exclusionary definition rather than trying to outline and define certain transactions which end up being very vague and overly broad. And it doesn't unnecessarily sweep in the universe of other professionals or impinge on the relationships of issuers and other market participants engaged in legitimate and necessary market activities. Mr. Speaker, how much time remains?
The gentlelady has 16 minutes remaining.
16 minutes.
That's correct.
Okay. Underwriting, providing accounting services, engineering advice, or offering traditional deposits and cash management services to municipalities. It's a straightforward approach that effectuates the goals of 975 while meeting the real-world needs of market participants. I want to urge everyone, all my colleagues, to support this important regulatory legislation. And again, I cannot thank the participants enough who participated in this bill. And I want to reserve my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to, again, thank the gentlelady for her help and support with regard to this process, which, as she aptly points out, was at times a little strenuous, but I believe in the end we were able to come together in a bipartisan fashion to produce what I hope is quality legislation that will be able to be better for municipal advisors all across the country. And would inquire, I don't know how many speakers the
Mr. Dole, I would like to yield some time to Ms. Maloney, also on the Financial Services Committee.
I will reserve the balance of my time.
You have the right to close. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves. The lady yields. Ms. Maloney is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 2827 and commend my good friend and colleague Ms. Moore and Mr. Dole and Ranking Member Frank and everyone else who worked very hard on this bill and their willingness to work in a bipartisan way. It is helpful to recall that the original Dodd-Frank regulations relating to municipal bond advisors only came about because of a number of man-made financial disasters involving municipalities and their advisors who were unregulated. It was just about a year ago that Jefferson County, Alabama, filed the biggest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. They joined the ranks of 11 other entities to file a Chapter 9 bankruptcy that year, including Boise County, Idaho, Central Falls, Rhode Island, and Harrisonburg, Pennsylvania. They all had unique problems, but one of the things that they had in common, they got some pretty costly advice, and it will haunt taxpayers for years. This was an area that was completely unregulated before the financial crisis, and the Dodd-Frank reforms, including the municipal advisor registration requirement, were enacted to respond to those crises. The Dodd-Frank reforms require individuals who advise municipalities to register with the SEC and be subject to regulation by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board. And this is a very good thing. But most of us agree that the SEC's proposed rule, original one, went just a little bit too far and made the definition of a municipal advisor a little bit too broad. It was defined in a way that could have potentially captured those who were not actually providing investment advice. For example, I know many institutions were concerned that under the SEC's proposed rule, merely providing a bank account to a municipality could mean that an institution would have to register as an advisor and be subject to MSRB regulation, all because they just provided basic banking services. And as someone who was there during the consideration of Dodd-Frank, I can tell you that that was not what Congress intended. However, I was concerned that the original version of this bill went too far in the other direction, and that could have opened up such a gaping hole you could have driven a truck full of other people's money through it. I was concerned that the draft bill eliminated the critical fiduciary duty standard that we included in Dodd-Frank. The fiduciary duty is a vital element that ensures that the advisors provide advice that is in the best interest of the municipality. So I think that this revised bill, and we have struck a good balance. Fiduciary duty is back in, and unintended capture is out. The revised language clearly and reasonably defines the activities that municipal advisors engage in and describes the kinds of advice that they provide. This bill now gives clear legislative guidance to ensure the goal of heightened supervision of municipal advisors is realized. It keeps taxpayers a little bit safer, credit markets more stable, and regulations a bit fair. All in all, I would say that it's a job well done, done in a bipartisan spirit, with a great deal of time and commitment. I commend the two major sponsors who are speaking with us today, and I yield back my time to my good friend Win Moore. Thank you for your work on this bill.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, gentlewoman from New York. I just want to say that, again, I think we need to credit Mr. Dole, who's a fairly new member, and that we actually listened to members who were senior members and didn't base it on our partisan differences that so often occur, but really respected people's experience and listened to their advice very earnestly. And so, again, I would urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In wrapping up, I don't have any other speakers, but I do want to have a couple of thank yous. I certainly want to thank the chairman, Chairman Baucus, for allowing this markup to move forward, and certainly appreciated his help and support. And I just, again, want to highlight how this was able to move forward in a bipartisan fashion, and certainly want to thank my good friend, Ms. Moore from Wisconsin, for all of her work and efforts to work with me on what I hope is going to be a bill that everyone here in this chamber will support. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask everyone, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, to support H.R. 2827, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2827 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Was that a race? For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5987 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 5987, a bill to establish the Manhattan Project National Historical Park in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Hanford, Washington, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 5987 is a bipartisan bill authored by me that will establish the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a like bill, bipartisan bill, also pending in the Senate. The park will encompass 3 locations that were integral to the tremendous engineering and human achievements of the Manhattan Project. The 3 locations are the Hanford site in my home state of Washington, Los Alamos in New Mexico, and Oak Ridge in Tennessee. The vast majority of the facilities that are eligible to be included in this park are already owned by the federal government, and they are located on lands owned and controlled by the Department of Energy. Our nation already possesses these pieces of history, and the real purpose of this bill is to officially declare the importance of preserving the history, providing access to the public and include the unique abilities of the Park Service to help tell this story. Currently, some of these historic facilities slated for inclusion in this park are officially scheduled to be destroyed at considerable taxpayer expense. A great many local community leaders in all 3 states and interested citizens have worked to coordinate a commitment to preserving this piece of our history. Additionally, the government will save millions of dollars from foregone destruction as opposed to the minimal cost of providing public access and park administration. In recognition of the important contributions to the Manhattan Project by the men and women at sites across the country, the bill contains a provision allowing communities like Dayton, Ohio, for example, outside the historical park, to receive technical assistance and support from the Department of Interior as they seek to preserve and manage their own Manhattan Park project resources. This is a good piece of legislation as part of our history, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To my friend, Mr. Hastings, the technology which created the bomb cannot be separated from the horror which the bomb created. The celebration of the technology of the bomb bespeaks a moral blindness to its effects, which include not only the devastation of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the $10 trillion Cold War between the U.S. and Russia, and the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons which today hang over the world like so many swords of Damocles. At a time when we should be organizing the world towards abolishing nuclear weapons before they abolish us, we are instead indulging in admiration at our cleverness as a species. The bomb is about graveyards. It's not about national parks. The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once wrote, "The major advances in civilization are processes that all but wreck the societies in which they occur." I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I advise my friend from Ohio I have no more requests for time, and I am prepared to yield back if he's prepared to yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio, excuse me.
I shall continue then.
The gentleman is recognized.
When you walk into the Bradbury Science Museum at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, you're greeted on your immediate left by replicas of Fat Man and Little Boy, the 2 bombs that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The space surrounding them does not include a picture of the leveled Japanese cities, pictures of children with massive birth defects, or stories of families and hundreds of years of history obliterated in the blink of an eye. It does not include a discussion of the health effects of worldwide distribution of radiation from the bombs or from the larger proliferation of nuclear technology that emanated from Los Alamos. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order. I'm sorry, but I'm making a presentation here, and I can't continue if members are talking in the background. And I'm asking members that this is an important debate. Please pay attention, and if you have something else to say, if you can participate, that would be great. Now, I'm speaking about this Bradbury Science Museum. The bombs reside in a section of the museum called Defense, which presents information on the nuclear arsenal, the nuclear stockpile, plutonium, and explosives. Other sections discuss how nuclear energy works and how the bomb was triggered. A substantive discussion of the myriad negative impacts of the technology that came out of the Manhattan Project is relegated to obscurity. A public forum tucked away in a corner provides space for public input. Now, when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, More than 200,000 people were killed instantly. In the years that followed, over 100,000 additional people died of radiation poisoning. The Japanese people today continue to experience the devastating and long-term effects of the bomb. It is now widely acknowledged by many top U.S. government officials at the time of the war that dropping the bomb on Japan was completely unnecessary. And I want to get into that section at this moment so that those who say, well, we need to create a memorial to the bomb because it ended the war, well, that's not true. I'm going to give you some quotes, Mr. Speaker. This is from Dwight David Eisenhower, who was General of the Armies and also later on President of the United States. He said, in July 1945, Secretary of War Stimson, visiting my headquarters in Germany, informed me that our government was preparing to drop an atomic bomb on Japan. I was one of those who felt there was a number of cogent reasons to question the wisdom of such act. The Secretary, upon giving me the news of the successful bomb test in New Mexico and of the plan for using it, asked for my reaction, apparently expecting a vigorous assent. During his recitation of the relevant facts, I had been conscious of a feeling of depression, and so I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary, and secondly because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It is my belief that Japan was, at that very moment, seeking some ways to surrender with a minimum loss of face. The Secretary was deeply perturbed by my attitude, unquote. That's Dwight Eisenhower in a book called Mandate for Change, page 360. From General Douglas MacArthur. Norman Cousins was a consultant to General MacArthur during the American occupation of Japan. Cousins writes of his conversations with MacArthur, quote, MacArthur's views about the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were starkly different from what the general public supposed. Cousins continues, when I asked General MacArthur about the decision to drop the bomb, I was surprised to learn he had not even been consulted. What I asked would his advice had been. He replied that he saw no military justification for the dropping of the bomb. The war might have ended weeks earlier, he said, if the United States had agreed, as it later did anyway, to the retention of the institution of the emperor. That's from a book called The Pathology of Power, Norman Cousins. Leo Szilard was the first scientist to conceive of how an atomic bomb might be made. That was in 1933. He speaks of a meeting with J. Robert Oppenheimer, the head scientist of the Manhattan Project. Here's the quote. Szilard, I told Oppenheimer that I thought it would be a very serious mistake to use the bomb against the cities of Japan. Oppenheimer didn't share my views. Well, said Oppenheimer, don't you think that if we tell the Russians what we intend to do and then use the bomb in Japan, the Russians will understand it? They'll understand it only too well, Szilard replied. Brigadier General Carter Clark, who was the military intelligence officer in charge of preparing intercepted Japanese cables, quote, when we didn't need to do it, and we knew we didn't need to do it, and they knew that we didn't need to do it, we used them as an experiment for 2 atomic bombs, unquote. This is quoted in Gar Alperovitz, The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb. Al Purowitz, by the way, who did 30 years of research on the subject, said, "I think it can be proven that the bomb was not only unnecessary, but known in advance not to be necessary." Another quote, "The Japanese position was hopeless even before the first atomic bomb fell because the Japanese had lost control of their own air." This is Henry H. Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Quote, "The Japanese had, in fact, already sued for peace. The atomic bomb played no decisive part from a purely military point of view in the defeat of Japan." Unquote. Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Quote, "The use of atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender." This is Admiral William D. Leahy, Chief of Staff to President Truman. Quote, "Certainly prior to 31st December 1945, and in all probability prior to 1st November 1945, Japan would have surrendered even if atomic bombs had not been dropped." Quote, and that's from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. Quote, "The war would have been over in 2 weeks without the Russians entering and without the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb had nothing to do with the end of the war at all." This is from Major General Curtis LeMay. Now, it's just not disputable that this technology was not necessary. So let's go back to the creation of a national park and the naming of the park after the Manhattan Project. May I ask how much time I have?
The gentleman has 10 minutes remaining.
Thank you. We have to now ask ourselves, since it can be widely disputed and by top military officials that the dropping of the bomb was not necessary, then why are we naming this technology, honoring this technology with a national park? I mean, it's really a legitimate question. When the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, again, 200,000 people were killed. And to have this discussion in the context of honoring a technology that created a bomb, I think, really raises questions about where we are with this country and where we are with the bomb. The splitting of the atom and the use of the split atom to create an atomic bomb actually bespeaks a split consciousness in this country. It was, in a sense, an intensification of dichotomized thinking, of us versus them, whoever they are. We then decided that all of our problems in humanity could be solved by technology, that the bomb then was put in place of reason, that the bomb was put in place of diplomacy, that the bomb was put in place of talking with each other and settling our differences. No, the bomb then became the metaphor for how technology rules over humanity. We're captives of our own machines. Now, Mr. Chairman, I remember as a young person going to elementary school that children would have to do drills called duck and cover because we believed that the United States was going to be targeted by nuclear weapons launched by the Soviet Union. The fear drove an entire generation's dreams. The fear caused the United States to spend trillions of dollars on a Cold War that took away from the needs of the people. The fear resides in the world today when there are some who urge an attack on Iran. Why? Because they are said to be developing a nuclear weapon. Where does this stop? We cannot honor this technology. We cannot celebrate ingenuity that was used to put all of humanity at risk. We have to begin to reassess who we are as human beings and ask ourselves whether or not we have essentially reached the limits of our ability to develop technology which we can control. And it's not only about nuclear weapons. When you learn that the globe itself is experiencing tremendous upset because of the human activity, when you learn that science can now create genetically modified organisms that can change the nature of food. As a matter of fact, life itself can be changed through cloning. We act as these mini-gods who can endlessly tinker with our planet and life itself, and then name parks after it. No. In the scheme of things, someone will say, Dennis, you know, this is just a park. What are you getting so excited about? This is about naming a new national park after the Manhattan Project. And we have to just stop and reflect on where this takes us. There should be a discussion about the full legacy of the Manhattan Project, including its devastating effects upon the Japanese people and upon the rest of the world. If there was going to be a new park, it should serve as a solemn monument to Japanese-American friendship that rose from the ashes and the worldwide work for nuclear disarmament that continues to this day, rather than a celebration of a technology which has brought such destruction to the world. Now, a failure to recognize this dimension, even in its first iteration, really is a significant injustice. I looked at the CRS report on this, and there's no mention of how this is going to be framed or phrased. The museum at Los Alamos is a celebration of the triumph of technology over humanity. It's a powerful illustration that we're developing technology at a rate that far exceeds our ability to manage it. Now we are faced with the choice to memorialize this point of view into a national park. I would ask how much time I have left.
The gentleman has 4.5 minutes.
In the last 4.5 minutes, I want to read a poem by Henry Reed. It's called The Naming of Parks. And what he does, he juxtaposes in this poem Japan before the dropping of the bomb and the technical aspects of the bomb itself. It's worth reading for this discussion. He calls it The Naming of Parts. Today we have the naming of parts. Yesterday we had daily cleaning, and tomorrow morning we shall have what to do after firing. But today we have the naming of parts. Japonica glistens like coral in all of the neighboring gardens. Today we have the naming of parts. This is the lower sling swivel, and this is the upper sling swivel, whose use you will see when you are given your slings. This is the piling swivel, which in your case you have not got. The branches hold in the gardens their silent, eloquent gestures, which in our case we have not got. This is the safety catch, which is also released with an easy flick of the thumb. And please do not let me see anyone using his finger. You can do it easily if you have strength in your thumb. The blossoms are fragile and motionless, never letting anyone see any of them using their finger. Oh, and this you can see is the bolt. The purpose of this is to open the breech as you see it. We can slide it rapidly backwards and forwards. We call this easing the spring. And rapidly backwards and forwards, the early bees are assaulting and fumbling the flowers. They call it easing the spring. They call it easing the spring, and it's perfectly easy if you have any strength in your thumb, like the bolt and the breech and the cocking piece and the point of balance, which in our case we have not got, and the almond blossom silent in all of the gardens, and the bees going backwards and forwards. For today we have the naming of parts. We're naming a park today. Yesterday we had the naming of parts, and not just Japan, but our humanity was obliterated. Do we get a chance to reclaim it? I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I'm prepared to close, Mr. Speaker, if the gentleman will yield back his time.